Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint up a Space Marine from the Raptors chapter. Something a little bit different for your games of Warhammer 40,000. So the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice smooth, even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. Now I'm coming in with some Deathworld Forest. I'm going to paint this all over the power armour to the model. This doesn't need to be very neat, you can get this over other areas than just the power armour, but make sure you coat all of the power armour to the Space Marine with a couple of layers of Deathworld Forest. Now you want to build this up over a couple of layers until we get a nice smooth coverage all over that power armour. This is quite a thin paint, so it is going to take a little while to build up that coverage, but just take your time, keep working your way around the model, applying thin layers of Deathworld Forest until we get a solid coat all over the power armour to our Raptor Space Marine. So while I've primed this model black, you could use Mechanica Standard Grey or another more neutral grey colour. It may be slightly quicker to build up that base cover, but I find working off of black always gives us a nice even base coat for our models. See here, after the first coat it's still very patchy coverage, so I'm going back in with the second coat and applying it all over that power armour until I get a solid coat of Deathworld Forest all over the power armour. This could take 2, 3 or even 4 coats, but just keep going until you get that solid coat all over the power armour to the Space Marine. As there isn't a whole lot of colours to apply to a Raptor Space Marine, it is worth taking the time now on the power armour to ensure we get that solid coverage, as this will give us a really good foundation for everything else we're going to do to the Space Marine. And after several coats you can see I've got that smooth coverage all over the power armour. It's giving us a really nice, almost khaki green colour to our Space Marine. So now with some Corvus Black, I'm going to apply this to all the areas of undersuit on our Space Marine. Obviously being really careful around the power arm we've already painted, just catching every part of the raised, ribbed undersuit on the Space Marine with a couple of layers of Corvus Black. See there are some on the arms as well as the legs, just make sure you check all over the Space Marine to find any areas of undersuit. At this stage I'm also going to pick out the belt as well as any strapping or anything like that that's on the Space Marine as well, picking all of these details with a couple of layers of Corvus Black. And I'm also going to paint all of his bolt rifle with a couple of layers of Corvus Black as well. There really isn't a lot of colours to paint on a Raptor Space Marine. It's a very simple paint scheme. It mostly is just green and black, so make sure you catch all of these areas with some Corvus Black. And with that Corvus Black applied, there is only one more base colour left to apply to this model, and that's going to be to pick out the Aquila and any metallic details. So for this I'm coming in with some lead belcher. I'm simply going to apply this all over the Aquila, obviously being really careful around the areas we've already painted for its power armour and any areas of black, just neatly catching all of the Aquila with some lead belcher. Just picking out any of the metallic details on the bolt rifle, so all of the muzzles, the magazine housing, markings on the gun, all of these I'm picking out with a couple of layers of lead belcher as well. So be really careful around the areas of black. If I do make any mistakes, I'll tidy these back up afterwards. And I'm also picking out any of the metallic details on the backpack and the helmet as well. Just making sure I catch any of these with a couple of layers of lead belcher. If you want to get a solid metallic colour all over these areas, this will really finish off the look to the Raptor Space Marine. And with all of that lead belcher applied, that is all of the base coats applied to our Space Marine. It really is quick and easy to get those base coats down. So now it's time to start shading the miniature. For shading, I'm just going to use known oil. And for the power armour, I'm going to very carefully pin shade this into all of the recesses of the power armour. So between every panel, every line, every detail, I'm just making sure I pick all of these out with a really thin pin shade of known oil. So if you do come in too thick with any of these, you can wick it away while it's still wet, or tidy it back up with some Death World Forest afterward. Just make sure you apply a pin shade to all of the recesses on the power armour. Obviously there are a lot of recesses on Space Marine power armour, so really take your time at this stage, work your way around the model and apply this known oil into every one of these recesses and details. It really is worth taking the time at this stage to make sure you catch every single one, because this is what's going to give that definition to the power armour, really make this very simple paint scheme pop on the model. See, I'm just very carefully working my way around the model, letting the known oil sink into all of the recesses so it darkens down all of those areas. Leaves the rest of the power armour that great khaki colour. Really take the time on the helmet to make sure you catch every single detail, because this will be the focal point to the model. Make sure you find every recess and apply that pin shade of known oil all over the power armour to the Space Marine. And after we finished with the recess shade, I'm going to do an all over shade of known oil all over the Aquila, making sure it sinks into all of those recesses and add some definition. I'm also going to apply this as an all over shade all over the areas we painted black as well. So all of the undersuit, belt, strapping, all of the gun casing and all of the lead belcher. Make sure you shade all of this with an all over shade of known oil. So we'll go into all of those recesses, add definition, really make all of the details on the Space Marine stand out.
If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below.
And after that shade has dried, you can see it's really added definition all over that power armour, made all of those details stand out, really added interest to our Space Marine. So now it's time to start highlighting. The first highlight I'm going to apply is some Lauren Forest, which I'm going to apply as a chunky edge highlight all over the power armour. So because of the rather simple paint scheme to this Space Marine chapter, I'm going to apply a two-stage highlight. So the first thing I'm doing is coming in with some Lauren Forest. I'm applying this as a chunky edge highlight around all of the panels and all of the detail on the power armour. So for a chunky highlight, you want to keep this fairly thin, but make sure it's large enough that you can apply a second highlight within the first highlight of Lauren Forest. So you don't want it to be too large, but just work your way around the model, applying a chunky edge highlight of Lauren Forest to all of the panels on the Space Marine. Now, this isn't going to be the brightest highlight or most dark, but it is going to work really well with our next step to add a really interesting highlight all over the model and aid in that transition from the darker base colour to the brighter final highlight. So a little bit like with the pin shade we just applied, this step is going to take a little while. Make sure you just take your time, work your way around the model and apply this chunky edge highlight to all the power armour on the Space Marine. If at any point you come in a little bit too thick with any of these lines, you can tidy it back up with a bit of Deathworld Forest afterwards. Just try and keep these lines nice and consistent, nice and even, as you work your way all the way around the power armour to our Raptor Space Marine. With that chunky edge highlight applied, you can see it's just brightened up the very edges of all of those armour panels. It's not too noticeable. It's a nice subtle effect that will work really well with our next step, which is to apply some Rawk flesh as a very thin edge highlight around all of the panels on the power armour. So once again, much like we did with our chunky edge highlight, work your way around the model, apply really thin edge highlight now on the edges of all of the panels, leaving a little bit of the Lauren Forest showing through at the edges, applying a small highlight of Rawk flesh at the very edges of all of the armor panels. For these lines, you want to keep them as thin as you can. Just have that highlight just catching the very edges of all of these armor panels. For some of the sharper points, you can use the side of your brush. For other areas, you're just going to use the very tip. Just don't apply too much pressure, and you'll get a nice, smooth, even edge highlight all the way around all of the panels. This Rawk flesh will work really well with the previous colours, and really give us that impression of light catching on the edges of all of these panels. It will really make that power armour stand out on the Space Marine and look really interesting on the tabletop. With such a simple colour scheme as the Raptors have, it really is worth taking the time to make sure you make the most out of every single colour. But once you've done a few edge highlights, you start to get a pattern down, and it really doesn't take as long as you think. And some people actually find it quite relaxing, working their way around, just slowly picking out the edges to all of the panels on their models. So just take your time, work your way around the Space Marine, applying this really thin edge highlight of Rawk flesh in the middle of all the places we've just applied the Lauren Forest chunky edge highlight. So if you come in too thick at any point with any of these lines, you can tidy them back up with a bit of Deathworld Forest and Lauren Forest. Try and keep them as thin as you can, and just apply really thin edge highlight lines on all of the raised details to the power armour. Highlight the backpack, as well as all the rest of the power armour. Just ensure you catch the very edges of all of those panels and details on the backpack with a really thin edge highlight of Rawk flesh. And after that edge highlight has been applied, you can see it's really made those armour panels pop, stand out, and added interest all over the model. So now I'm coming in with some Mephiston red, and I'm going to paint the eyes. So for this, I'm just sinking this into the recesses of the eye sockets. Obviously being really careful around the green power armour we've already painted and highlighted. Applying a little bit of Mephiston red into those eye lenses. And that Mephiston red applied, you can see those eyes are popping out and adding some interest to the helmet. So I'm going to highlight these with a little bit of Wild Rider red first. I'm simply applying a thin line of Wild Rider red at the very bottom of each of the eye lenses. And it's nice and thin, just a thin line of Wild Rider red. Wild Rider red applied. There's just one final step to apply to finish these eye lenses off. Really add character to this model. And that's going to be a small spot of white scar. I'm just going to apply a small white spot in the very back corner of both the eye lenses to act like a reflection point for the light. And with those eyes painted, that is the power armour and helmet completed on the model. So now it's time to start highlighting some of the black details. First one of these I'm going to highlight is with Mechanica Standard Grey. For this I'm going to apply a thin line on the top of all of the ridges to the undersuit. So work your way around the model. On all of these ridges to the undersuit we can see, I'm just catching the very top with a thin line of Mechanica Standard Grey. So we'll just highlight the raise points and add some interest to the otherwise quite dull areas of the undersuit. I'm also applying this to any of the straps at this stage as well, but not the belt. I'm going to highlight that at a later stage. Make sure you catch all the areas of the undersuit with this thin highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey. And with that undersuit and strapping highlighted, you can see it's broken up that black a little bit and added some interest to these areas of the model. So now I'm going to highlight the belt. For this I'm coming in with some Skaven Blight Dinge. I'm simply applying this as an edge highlight to the very top and bottom of the belt. If you've got any pouches on your model, I'd highlight these with Skaven Blight Dinge as well. It's just a slightly different colour than Mechanica Standard Grey. It adds a little bit of interest. Breaks up those tones on the model. And with the belt highlighted, the next black detail I'm going to highlight is all of the gun casing. This I'm going to do a two-stage highlight, again much like the power armour. So first of all I'm coming in with some Mechanica Standard Grey. I'm going to apply this once again as a chunky highlight all over the casing to the gun. So you don't want these lines to be too thick, but you do want them to be big enough that you can put another highlight within them in the next step. So I'm just working my way around the casing to the gun, the edge of all of the details. I'm applying a thin, chunky highlight. Mechanica Standard Grey all over the casing to his bolt gun. Not forgetting the scope on the top of the gun as well. Make sure I catch all of this with some Mechanica Standard Grey as well. Mechanica Standard Grey applied. It looks a little bit messy, but that's okay because we'll be coming back in with another thin highlight now, and that will tidy up the look of the gun. So for this second highlight, I'm coming in with some Dawnstone. I'm going to apply this as a thin edge highlight around the very edges of all the panels on the bolt gun. So keep this thin enough you can see a little bit of the Mechanica Standard Grey showing through. Just apply a really thin edge highlight of Dawnstone to all of the areas we just applied the Mechanica Standard Grey on the bolt gun. Let's get also remember to catch all of the parts on the scope to the rifle as well, just catching these with a thin edge highlight of Dawnstone. And with the bolt rifle highlighted, there isn't a lot of things left to paint on the model, but I am going to paint the lights on his arm now. First of all, I'm coming in with some Avalan Sunset. I'm going to paint one of these details here on his arm. I'm just picking this one out with some Avalan Sunset. Once again, this will break up that green colour and add some interest. Now with some Crag Blue, I'm going to paint the other little light on his arm as well. So these aren't important details, but they do break up that colour a little bit and just add a bit more interest to our Space Marine once he's finished. And with those lights on his arm painted, there's only one final thing left to highlight on the model, and that's going to be all of the metallic details. For this, I'm coming in with a little bit of Stormhose Silver. I'm just going to very carefully apply this as an edge highlight to all of the metallic details on the model. Once again, keep these nice and small, and just catch the very edges of anything we painted with Lead Belcher with a thin edge highlight of Stormhose Silver. Also, you want to catch all of the details on the Aquila and the gun, making sure you catch all of these. A small edge highlight of Stormhose Silver, leaving some of the previous colours showing through underneath. I'm also going to make sure I just catch all of the metallic details on the backpack with a thin edge highlight of Stormhose Silver as well. And with the Stormhose Silver applied, that is how to easily paint a Raptor Space Marine for your games of Warhammer 40,000. It's a very simple colour scheme, but I think it works really well, and a whole army of these guys would look great on the tabletop. So thank you very much for watching. Please let me know in the comments down below, are there any other Space Marine chapters you would like to see me paint? Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!